Now, of all the people I could have spoken to today, there's really only one that I wanted to share this moment with because it is heartbreaking. He's a man who has bled red, was one of the reasons why I was introduced and loved the brand, and a man who is such a custodian of it, but more importantly, is just so articulate about what it means that Australia not only doesn't make cars anymore, but this thing that was as iconic as Vegemite is about to no longer exist. Mark Skaife from the Fox Sports team joins us right now from his base in Melbourne. Great man. Are you surprised about how emotional today is?
Well, I am, to be perfectly honest. I spoke to you earlier today, and two of us were battling to hold back the tears. It was one of those ones where I know we might be big sooks, but the reality is it's a very, very big change to a landscape that I never envisaged. I just never in my lifetime thought that there'd be a day where we would see Holden move out of this country. And although there's been recent signs since the end of the manufacturing sector and the way that has worked in terms of their marketplace and their market share, etc., there's been some worrying signs. But the day that it happens, it still doesn't make it any less sad.
No, I mean, I think you said so beautifully that it's a bit like a friend who's been cooked for a while. You know what's inevitably going to happen, but it makes it no less shocking when it does happen. And look, we've got to say up front here that the people that we feel most for are the hundreds of people who work inside that company and the thousands more that have got connections. Like on a day like today, it's the dealer networks. It's the people that have been the absolute front of the brand, regardless of whether it was the best TV ad or the most woke nonsense that they were pushing. They were, I mean, they're in every suburb in the country.
Well, it's been part of the social fabric of Australia, hasn't it? You know, you've either been blue or you've been red. The reality around football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars, it's been part of our psyche. And I'm with you. I think, today I've had so many people talk to me about car racing, and I've tried to divert all the attention away from car racing because this is a day where Australian culture and the Australian landscape and the DNA of what we are as a nation and what we've manufactured and what we've loved. People. My grandfather bought Holden Utes. My father raced a Holden Tirana XU1 as his first one. I was lucky enough to drive a WB Ute as my first car.
Awesome.
By the time you get to then driving for Holden as the factory team and replacing Peter Brock at the factory team, there's symbolic things in people's lives. And those people today that have been working there for so long, Paul, and as you correctly point out, it's not just the people in-house, it's the people in their regional offices, it's the people in all those dealerships across the country. And so many of those dealers have been dealers for 50 and 60 years. So, it's a time when we need to reflect and be saddened. I heard Scott Morrison say that he was angry. I think there's a lot of anger within the Holden family because it's a brand that I never thought would go away.
So how do you feel about, what this represents? Because, when former Prime Ministers were standing there as the first one rolled out for for much of the 20th century, what showed that you were a modern, first-class, world-class country was to be able to make a car. Not just because it showed that you could understand, a factory processing line, but you could design, that you could engineer, that you could safety, all of these different things, because it's not click, drag and do somewhere else. You had to essentially start from a blank piece of paper or, an unmoulded piece of clay. And we lost that when we lost manufacturing. But people need to understand that there are still some very big brains that were contributing to that idea of building something that have been working with Holden since they stopped building cars. Those people, fingers crossed, they end up somewhere else. But for Australia not to be in that game is a real failure, and we can blame all sorts of people, but let's just say it's something that we have lost, and it feels like we've lost for no good reason.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good way of trying to capture the situation, because the day that we stopped manufacturing was the day that we were on a downward spiral. And, for me, I think a big part of what Australia does well is we make good stuff. We're good at stuff. And in the GM world, we were accredited as the best rear-wheel drive car makers in the world. And if you think about that VF Commodore in the final year of manufacture in Australia, it would be, bar none, the best value rear-wheel drive car anywhere in the world. And by not manufacturing it anymore, you lose the DNA. So a Commodore that comes in from overseas that's not a handmade, Australian designed and engineered car was always going to be a tough call.
Just finally here, I know there's going to be plenty of, the autopsy. We'll have lots of different people having a view on it. I think the PM, and you mentioned this before, kind of nailed it pretty strong here, which is this was a company that hung around, it felt like, it hung around for as long as government was willing to give it extra money. As soon as that extra money disappeared, then basically out the door. Is it possible to start to pick the moment when today was inevitable?
Look, I think the inevitable part was essentially the time that the decision was made to not make the cars locally. I think, Australians, you can't trick people. There aren't gimmicks in the marketplace anymore. And the reality around the landscape of cars that are in our marketplace is there are no duds anymore. They're pretty much good quality cars. So if you're not making them here and you're not committed to the local industry, people see through that. Having said that, I think one of the things that's a really tricky part of this whole equation, and one of the ones that I would have always argued, and I said this to you earlier today, is there was never in a time of my life that I thought that Holden and Ford's combined market share would be less than half of Toyota's.
Exactly.
So how does that get to be? How does the marketplace change so much? Does the car mean as much as it used to? I would like to think that it does. But mobile phones and changes of life in terms of the freedom that you spoke about have changed the way that we experience and our touch points around cars. So, the future of the industry is obviously one that I'm very passionate about, and I want to make sure that our plan around our racing business, for instance, keeps GM connected to our sport.
Well, I was going to say, let's be clear. Supercars has no worry here, right? Anyone who's kind of reading into that doesn't quite understand how it works. I know we're sort of trying to avoid that as a bit, but I can't not ask you about that.
Yeah, look, we've been working on a plan for a long time. The current plan that we've got in place is called Car of the Future, which we've been racing now since 2013. The new plan is another next generation car, and that needs to be basically, as a consequence of market relevance and automotive industry interaction, we need to make sure that those cars and those brands are what people want to see racing. So we've done a lot of research. We've worked very hard with a lot of the major manufacturers, and GM included in that, to develop a plan that inspires new audience, that keeps our current audience in place. We don't disenfranchise the people that love our sport today, and there's plenty of those. But we want to make a plan for the future, and that product plan is very, very important as we speak.
All right, just hope it's not a Tesla, but we'll see what happens. All right.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you, great man. Good luck. Of course, you're on the plane tomorrow, and it's all about Adelaide 500. Can't wait to be there in person, but I want everyone, like they will, in massive numbers. Even greater reason to watch from Thursday on Fox Sports. Mark Skaife, thank you for this chat. Thank you for sharing that Holden legacy, and I can't wait to see you in person in Adelaide this weekend.
Thanks, Paul.